Comments, we have would you like to state your name for the record, please, and who you represent?
Coletta Rimas. I'm just a student. I'm attending a government class, so I have to attend public meetings.
Nice.
Well, welcome.
Well, welcome.
Welcome.
What school do you go to?
USF.
Very nice. My granddaughter goes there. Yeah. Okay. So our student doesn't have a public comment, and Mr. Blanton, do you have anything?
No public comment, just here to listen.
Okay. Our first action item is to approve our minutes from the last meeting. May I have a motion?
Move approval. Second.
Lisa made a motion, and it was seconded by Mayor, whoever you are.
It's Friday.
It's Friday.
North Georgia.
North Georgia.
South Georgia. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, information items. Who's doing this one? Harry?
Well, I thought,
Brad? Does this
I
state
thought you
of-
guys could maybe talk through that the sheet, but maybe we have our federal folks, since we're on the phone, go first. Is that okay? Harry, do you want to give us an update on what's going on? Harry or Steve, you want to give us an update and just a quick update on Commissioner Long's visit and my visit as well.
Sure. Is Steve on? Steve, are you on?
Maybe not.
Steve's not on yet. Okay. So a couple things to report. So I guess the first item is Brad's going to be coming up next Friday to meet with the Senate Banking Committee. In the Senate, the Banking Committee actually oversees the transit program. And so Brad's been invited up based on a meeting, Commissioner, that we had with you and the Senate Banking Committee last, I guess it was April. And they were impressed by what PSTA is doing with innovative technologies and have invited Brad to be on a roundtable discussion next Friday afternoon. So that's a great honor that Brad's been invited to do that. So we'll get to make the point about what you're doing there and maybe some federal relief that might be needed to advance these partnerships with technology providers. So that's exciting, good for Brad.
Well, it's exciting, and it also points to how critical these meetings are and how much they can come to fruition, even if it's not immediately.
Yeah.
There's evidence that they're worthwhile, huh?
Yep.
Now,
And then, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Harry, just one question on that, because we had a call with the banking staff to plan it, but can you or I'm not sure if they're going to do it directly, but my understanding was that somebody would invite Senator Rubio and Senator Nelson's staff, even though they're not on the banking committee, to participate as well.
Yeah, we'll do that, and we'll also invite Congressman Christie and Congressman Golarakis' staff to come over too. So they can
Excellent.
Oh, great. Okay.
So, yeah, so we'll do that. We'll take care of that.
Okay.
And then the other exciting thing is that Commissioner Long and Commissioner Justice, and I'm not sure some other commissioners going to be coming up from Pinellas County, but two of your commissioners are going to be coming to a White House, a full day of White House briefings on July 27th. This is going to be the first of its kind. All of the Florida counties have been invited to send their county commissioners to this White House briefing on the 27th, and we haven't seen the agenda. I think they're still formulating the agenda for what's going to be discussed, but it's from 12 to 6 on the 27th. And I presume the president will come through and attend part of that meeting. I assume that some cabinet secretaries will also come through. And so I think it's a great opportunity, obviously, for Commissioner Long and Commissioner Justice to talk about Pinellas County priorities, but also, since you're dual headed, it's a great opportunity for you to talk about some of the misconceptions, I think, that the president and his administration have about FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, and the value of the infrastructure grants that they provide, particularly in our case, the Small Start Program. The House Appropriations, as you know, the president's budget request recommended eliminating funding for the Small Start Program and only providing funds for small start projects that already had executed agreements. That would mean that our project, the VRT project for Central Avenue, wouldn't be eligible for funding. The House Appropriations Committee drafted up its Transportation Appropriations Bill yesterday, and they only included funding in there for small starts that have executed agreements. And so we have some work to do to make sure that the Senate provides additional funding. We need to talk to Senator Rubio about that. So it's really important, I think, if you get to the White House and anybody, Secretary Chow or anybody from the administration there you can talk to, you need to remind them that this is important, that these transit projects are supported in a partnership with the federal government. And so I think it's a good opportunity, Commissioner Long, Commissioner Justice, for you guys to make that point in 2 weeks.
Well, unfortunately, Commissioner Justice is ill today and he's not here, but I will make sure that I educate him about our meeting today so that he's well prepared too.
Yep. So just to finish out on the appropriations front, the House Appropriations Committee will work on the full committee will work on the transportation bill Monday night. And we just learned this morning, Brad, you might be interested in it. We learned this morning that by next Wednesday, the Appropriations Committee will have approved all 12 individual appropriations bills. And the goal now seems to be to package all 12 of those bills up into one large omnibus appropriations bill for fiscal year 18 and take that to the House floor on the last week in July, the week that you're here, Commissioner Long. The House is going to try and approve all 12 bills in one fell swoop and send them over to the Senate. So we will continue to work with the Senate and the House on this Small Start program to make sure we can find some funding for you all.
So Harry, just as an aside, is it possible for you to see if you can get us an appointment with Congressman Christ and maybe Bill Arakis as well while we're up there?
Yeah, we've already talked to Congressman Christ about taking you over to see him. I understand you have time Friday morning before you leave. So I think we thought it might be valuable to take you over to see the members of Congress on Friday morning after you've been at the White House, so you can kind of give them a download on what you all talked about in your White House meeting. I thought that might be more productive. So Congressman Christ is already, we're working to get you on the schedule Friday morning. We've already talked to him about that, and we will talk to Congressman Arakis to reserve some time.
Well, let me tell you about this national issue that I've become involved in up to my eyebrows, and that's the opioid drug epidemic.
Right.
And so I was participating in a national conference with county leaders while I was on the train down to Palm Beach. I want you to know, cost me $30. It's fabulous. But there's a group of law firms that are forming a consortium nationwide, and the idea is that they want to attack this opioid crisis like Lawton Childs did when he was governor and went after big tobacco. You remember that? So I have a working task force group that I've put together for July 17th of the sheriff, the public health director, Dr. Cho, Dr. Thogmartin, who's our medical examiner. I wish Doyle was here. I'm losing my brain. The attorney that's leading this effort nationwide, Mark Woodard, and Jewel, our interim county attorney. And we're going to talk about the strategy and see if we can work towards having Pinellas County declared, having this issue declared a public health emergency in Pinellas County, and or crisis, or whatever the exact wording should be. And it was interesting to note that FAC, when I went down to FAC, that is their #1 issue as well. And our new president of FAC, Chris Constance, is from Charlotte County, and he's working with me to put the same thing in place in his county, and so is Melissa McKinley, who's the second VP of FAC. She's going to follow our lead in Pinellas down in Palm Beach. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, and I do believe that this firm, this consortium, are you representing Pasco now?
We are, and Greg represents Charlotte County, so he works with them. But,
Okay, so so I don't know if Greg's on the call, but can you fill him in? Because Pasco, it's my understanding, is joining in this national lawsuit, and they just firmed that up this last week. So that's all the info I wanted to make sure and let the legislative folks know, because I look forward to maybe bringing something forward that mirrors that during the legislative. What?
And not to digress from transportation, but Congressman Buchanan has been very involved in this issue because the Manatee County's got a huge problem too. And so
Yeah, they
maybe we
do.
can try and get you time with him when you're up here. But, you know, Congress provided significant funding last year for the opioid problem, and there's additional funding in the bill this year. So we'll get you a breakdown of some of that too. Maybe you can qualify for some of that money for the county.
And Commissioner,
Excellent.
Commissioner, we can talk offline, but the Community Health Centers of Pinellas actually is working, I believe, with the county as well right now on getting a grant to do some things in the community through the community health centers. So we can talk about that offline as well.
I'd love that, thank you. Okay, all right, well, I'm glad I brought it up. Sorry, Brad, it didn't have to do with transportation, but
That's
big
okay.
issue.
Thank you,
So,
Harry.
Commissioner, the other federal report is you all have submitted your logo application for electric buses to the Federal Transit Administration. We've already got letters of support from Congressman Bilirakis and Senator Nelson. Senator Rubio's staff was in touch with us yesterday. They're finishing their letter up, and Congressman Crist is finishing his letter up. So we'll have letters of support for that application for all four for those. And the last thing is there's Brad can talk to you more about this, but there's a notice of federal funding that just came out this week for replacement of buses and bus facilities. But it's interesting, and Brad pointed this out, that there's a provision in that funding opportunity that gives bonus points to transit authorities that use advanced technology to connect bus systems. So we're going to try and work with the FDA to see if that we can get you some additional points on your applications because of your use with your work with Uber and Lyft.
But what about, is there a possibility to use that in an effort to go with those new autonomous buses that I've been reading about, Brad, maybe?
Well, it's possible. I think as Harry said, the language that was written is a little bit vague. Innovative technologies in connecting other transportation networks is the wording. So it probably does include that. And so trying to get some clarification what they're really angling for is probably the first step. Yeah.
So we can work on that next week, next Friday when you're here, Brad. Maybe we can get a meeting or two about that and try and get some clarification.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Anyway, that's kind of our federal report. I'm happy to answer any questions, Brad. Commissioner.
When are you down here again?
Next week.
Well, we're going to be at your board. We're coming to your board meeting on the 26th. So Steve and I will both be there on the 26th.
Excellent. It'll be good to see you. Cassandra?
Sure.
Harry, will we know when they'll make a decision on the Lono before we submit bus and bus facilities? Because that sort of comes from the same pool, and if we get one, it's unlikely that we would get the other. And then we'll better know what to apply for under bus and bus facilities if we know whether or not we've gotten the Lono.
Yeah, I don't know what the schedule is for the Lono award. I'll find out. I'll talk to Steve and we'll send you an answer. I'll get you an answer this afternoon and see what his advice is too.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And Harry, you did say that the appropriations committee met last night and zeroed it out.
Well, they didn't zero it out. What they did is they provided enough small start funding to fund projects that were already had executed agreements. So they didn't zero the program out. So the upside is there's still money in the program. The bad news is there's not money for basically new small starts, which was what you would be. And so we need to make sure that the Senate provides money for new small starts. So when they go to conference, there's money in there for new small starts. Now, the one thing I will say about the appropriations process is they drafted up their bills to much lower levels than they hope to get some relief here by raising the spending caps that Congress is working under. They're about $5 billion below where they want to be, and so their hope is that they can get some additional spending authority for all the appropriations committees so that when they go to conference with the Senate, they can raise some of these funding levels, like funding for the FTA.
Okay. Well, okay.
We've got
That's
a
good.
ways to go, so don't.
Okay.
We think it'll work out in the end.
Okay. Okay. Well, thanks. We will see you next week.
Okay.
Harry and Steve will be here, kind of like Ron and Natalie were here last meeting, talking about the state, to give the full board a little snapshot of what's been going on. It's not like anything goes on in Washington, D.C., that they can cover in 2 minutes before we have the Pinellas Health Department talking about smoking cessation. But they'll do the rest.
All right. Well, thank you. I'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you,
Okay.
Harry. Bye, Steve.
All right. All
Bye.
right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, which then leads us to some good discussions that we've been having with Ron and Natalie in preparation for not the state legislative session, which just ended, but the next one, which is just about to begin very quickly. And so online and then at your places is a little summary that I'll let Ron and Natalie kind of walk through the proposed ideas that we have on a legislative agenda for next year.
Very good, thanks, Brad. And let me make sure we all kind of understand too. So, session just ended, obviously. Committee weeks start in September. There's 5 committee weeks between September and December, and session starts in January. So, in a perfect world, what we're trying to do is get an agenda approved by you and by the board in September, October at the latest possibly, which would still give us plenty of time. To give you all a quick recap, we had 4 adopted items for the 2017 agenda. Number 1 was the Clearwater Beach to TIA Bus Express. For operating funds, we did not get that. We kind of knew going in that trying to get recurring dollars for for operations for a direct bus service could be a little bit of a heavy lift since it was not a part of the DOT work plan, so that was not done. There were some ridership number questions and some other things. The good news is we had the $1 million we did get for the expansion of the Memorial Causeway Bridge for the PD&E. I know that, I think Cassandra and Brad are already having conversations with DOT, more focusing on the design phase of that to make sure that we can kind of move that along pretty quick, and DOT is kind of been taking the lead on that, which will allow us hopefully be able to get into the work plan in the future to be able to get that funded. So that was really good news. Center Lab ballot was obviously key on that. So not only getting into the budget late, but more importantly, protecting it with the governor. Typically, when you have a DOT project that's outside of the work plan, it has veto written all over it. But I think between Center Lab ballots that support in our explanation of you have to get the updated PD&E to move forward to get into the MPO, which leads to the DOT work plan, which allows us to get funded in the future. I think staff kind of bought into that rationale. So
can I ask you, are they talking again, the governor and Latvala?
my understanding is they are.
Making up?
I think they're making up.
That would be very helpful.
Yes. Just tell me about it.
One more year.
Number 3 was transportation disadvantage funds. As we all know, there was a new formula that was done last year by the Transportation Disadvantage Commission that came out. It was in proviso, so I'm sure we understand it. So even though there was additional language which benefited us by almost $1 million, that was for 1 year. They're going to come back potentially with a new formula next year, or it could be the same formula. There was some additional proviso put in the budget, if needed, for them to work with, was it APD, Agency for Persons with Disability, which is under Senator Garcia's committee, who's from Miami, who wanted to make sure that his committee would have jurisdiction of that, if needed, to look at it next year. Then obviously the last one was the regional coordination of the MOU with HART and us, and also there's some things kind of factored with T-BARTA last year that we were active on as well. So with all that being said, that kind of leads into some discussions for 2018, some possibilities. And let me start the discussion with, we obviously had a line item last year in the budget. Typically, and I think the commissioner will tell you as a former legislator, when an organization gets money in a budget for 1 year, coming back the following year to trying to get another project funded, sometimes it's not possible. But I think the reason we would be silly not to go back and ask at this point is Senator Latval is only going to be chairman of the Appropriations Committee for 1 more year. Senator Brandis is the chairman of the TED Committee. Obviously, having leadership from Pinellas County, particularly on the Senate side, would be good for us, I think, position as well to go back with an additional ask for another project. And so we met about 2 weeks ago with staff to kind of walk through kind of some, a wish list of items that we possibly could go after. There's 3 that are listed, and if you want, I can have, Cassandra and Brad kind of walk through some more of the details on them. It doesn't mean we have to do all 3. It doesn't mean there's a list on the back of your paper, by the way. There's some other ones that we had talked about that's kind of carried over from previous years as well. Let me caution you on, as we've done in the last year, and I think you've done in previous years, is we want to pick 2 or 3 items. We don't want to go after 6 things. We're not going to get 6 things. We're going to go after 3 things. We're probably going to get 1 or 2. So we just need to be, make sure that whatever the priorities are, the 2 or 3 items that we want, that they're already done. We've already got backup information to be able to go to the legislature and say, these are things that are planned, they're thought out. This is how we want to do them. This is what our commitment to them. This is what why it's potentially needed from a strategic planning standpoint for the organization. And more importantly, what are the benefits to the citizens of Pinellas County? So the 3 are integrated transit smartphone app development, which, Cassandra, correct me if I'm wrong, you all actually submitted something to DOT before on this, is that correct?
Yes, we have an application that we worked on with HART staff that is a complete package of an ask. We were informed that DOT would not pay for technologies, and so this would be one of those things where we could not put it into the DOT budget.
Which is good for us, because we have a good rationale of getting outside the work plan.
Why won't they pay for technology?
This is, you know what, we don't know, because we asked them for, they paid for an earlier part of the development of this program of the regional fare collection, and when we went back to them for the next phase, they said they weren't going to pay for software, essentially.
So, if I might, I think that's outrageous. I mean, technology is the face of the future. You can't do anything anymore in our lives without technology.
And the good news is, I think Senator Brandis would completely agree with you.
Well, hello.
So that's what we.
Whoever is that's a policy, is it a law, what is it that's getting in their way? Can you guys find that out for us so that we know, we don't even know who to go beat up over it?
We will, and again, that actually may help our argument in Tallahassee of why we would want a line item for it. And more importantly, HART could be a part of this effort as well, correct?
Yes, yes.
And as we both met last night, we have an opportunity with some new leadership, at least here locally with the DOT, a new district secretary who.
Some of us met him last night.
Yeah, maybe hasn't heard of this new.
Well, this was a central office discussion. We had put this application in through the intermodal development grant opportunities. We sat down with Ford Pinellas staff earlier this week and talked about some other issues that we have with an app. So I think we're all sort of, this is a very well-developed project. I think we just need to find the right ask and the right place to make the ask.
But maybe it's a messaging issue too, Cassandra, because I clearly remember Paul Steinman saying in some presentation, I think it was at Tiger Bay, they were preparing the new highways of the future with those thingies in them that'll talk to the cars and the satellites.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know what you call that, I know it's not thingies.
Sensors.
You could call it infrastructure to vehicle.
Connected
But that's
vehicle to
technology
yeah.
right there.
Connected vehicle technology.
Isn't that technology right there?
Yes,
Well,
but
and
that is different, they separate that from software development. And this becomes software, and I think they're calling it, we don't pay for technology, but we're hearing at the staff level, but when we dig a little deeper, it's software development.
It's an app. I don't
Yes.
think they're willing to pay for an app that's gonna be
Right.
on somebody's phone potentially.
Again, this is not the message that we got This is not the message that we've received in years past, nor was it the message that we received from the district office when we told them about our potential application 2 months before we put the application together. And so it was only after we put the application together and then they sent it to Tallahassee that the central office said, we're not paying for
And
software.
what-
We'll
what-
find out.
I will
So
find-
this is,
and
so
what
this is where we are.
And this is what my plan would be, is I want to get some direction from you all that these 2 or 3 or 4 items are things we're interested in as a committee. What I then want to do between now and our next meeting, because this is for informational, you're not approving anything today, correct?
Correct.
We would come back at the next meeting. What I want to do between now and then is reach out to some of our key members of the delegation and say, this is what we're thinking. Here's our initial wish list. What do you think? And let's get some buy-in from our delegation. So when it's approved, we've already know that we've got buy-in from our 2 or 3 key members of the delegation that are willing to help on these issues. So Commissioner, what I'll do is is find out from DOT. I think it's more the app aspect of it, but more importantly, I may have Senator Brandis' office help answer that question as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. very
Number
much.
2, any questions on the app? Number 2 is the autonomous vehicle pilot program in downtown St. Pete. The reason that's come up is there's been a lot of talk about Uber and Lyft, particularly on the Uber side of the equation, of them looking at, they're already piloting in other parts of the country. They want to start doing some things in Florida. Senator Brandis obviously has been very involved in getting legislation for Uber in the state, has a lot of connections with Uber. If there's an opportunity at some level to do some type of a pilot program with them in St. Petersburg. So that's a conversation I have to have with Senator Brandis about where are those conversations, does it fit into an ask for next year? What does that look like? But again, our thought process when we met a couple weeks ago would be, if there's a chance to do this now with Senator Brandis and Senator Latvala there, and Uber is willing to do something in the state, why not do it in Senator Brandis' backyard?
Lisa? Okay, committee members, let's get
I agree, and I would love to be a part of that conversation, so that I can bring it back to our
Okay.
council members and everything.
So why don't we, what I'll initially do is talk with Senator Brandis offline about, here's some of our initial ask. If this is something which I think he will want to do, is we'll make sure you include it in the meeting with him to have that discussion.
Thank you.
And Lisa, do you when we have this meeting, do you make a committee report to
Yes.
the council?
Yes.
That would be important, because I know Councilor Rice and Amy are very interested in the transportation stuff.
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Mayor?
I mean, I love the
Doug?
idea.
I know your name. Just so you know.
Hey, you, thingy?
Hey, it's morning.
I know.
Take a while to get going.
But I hear the other day, it's hard to make your first cup of coffee when you haven't had your first cup of coffee, so, yeah. I just question, I know Brandis and Latvala don't get along that well. Would they see this through together, or would they fight each other?
I think we'll be fine there, and it depends on, who's sponsoring it, and if we have multiple asses, making sure that one's taking the lead on one's taking the lead on the other. What we did last year is we initially had Senator Brandis involved on the front end to make sure that, the Memorial Causeway Bridge expansion was in through Senator Brandis. Then we had Senator Latvala bring it to the finish line. I would envision probably something like that again, so.
I'm a little concerned that we have the Clearwater Beach Express to Tampa International on the back page.
Well,
Is there something we
yeah.
can do about that?
Yeah, well, and there's actually probably 2 on the back page you want to put on the front page, but before I get to the last one was the transportation disadvantage funding. I think we're all clear why that's continued to be on the list. On the back side here, number 1, the Beach Express is, I think we need to continue to work with DOT. I think it's up to you all if you want to, have that on the list. I think from a funding standpoint, if one of the first 2 are funded, trying to get a line item for the Beach Express is probably a tough lift, but it doesn't mean we can't continue to work with DOT to find ways to get to the part of the initial work plan.
Yeah, I mean, we had a good candid discussion with Ron and Natalie and Alan Susky, and this project is very well supported locally by certain folks. The Tampa Bay Partnership went and spoke to the Bay Area delegation in support of an express bus network. WIT has done some nice presentations, and to get it included as the TMA priority for express bus service to the airport from multiple points. The airport just even recently took wrote another letter of support. They're very supportive of having express buses hub into their area. There's been some pushback, I think, from folks on Clearwater Beach, or I just met with them earlier this week, and it's not really pushback. They just want input and understanding of exactly how it would work, and I think we can get there. But I know that they made some calls to Senator Brandis during the session that raised some questions and things, and I think we can answer those questions. But the issue is, the odds of it getting funded through the legislature, through a line item, are so low. What we really need is the DOT to, the district office to support this, and they will support it if they hear, I think, from the MPOs and the local governments that they support this, and they can fund it, and they can provide there are ways. They may not know exactly how the ways, but there are ways that they can provide this funding. A phone call from Senator Brandis or LaValle to them at the final time would certainly have help. But that's the thought there, is that this is a front page thing.
But use it not as a line, but use it working the local process potentially and trying to get it included as the work plan.
Maybe even coming up with a local lobbying strategy, or maybe not lobbying, but a strategy on how we're going to approach this with the DOT, with our partners like Ford Pinellas, TMA, etc., the airport, to make this happen.
Commissioner, there was 2 issues that was raised during session. Is A, are all the stakeholders on board? Which again, I think to Brad's point, we couldn't clearly say yes, everybody's on board with it. There was some questions being raised during session. And number 2 was some of the ridership numbers. Again, as opposed to going to Tallahassee to do that, maybe we'll start with the local DOT, working with their local MPO to try to attack it that way. So to answer your question, it's probably a front list item. Maybe it's not done as a line item through Tallahassee.
My only thought is, and I think we've done this in the past, and I don't know that it was intentional, but maybe it is intentional this time, is if it's a front item, line item, and we know it's not going to get pushed, but then they help us. I think in the past they've encouraged us to go to the DOT, take it off the line item because it'll get scratched, but they then help with the lift, and it also maybe says, we'll help you with 1 and 2 if you take number 4, and I don't know, I can't remember what the project was, but they helped us kind of do that before.
The Central Avenue.
Yeah, the Central Avenue. Yeah, it was on there as a line item, but they helped us on other stuff and encouraged us, and then they helped with the lift, which is what you're saying by the call from LaValle and Brandis. But, if it is a front item, we know it's going to get scratched, but,
Yeah, I mean...
or do you just go straight to front page, but...
Well, we can also develop the agenda in such a way that, look, you've got 2 or 3 key priorities until it doesn't, just because you put things on our list doesn't mean that all of them have to be a Tallahassee ask.
Right.
We can have a strategy for 1 or 2 issues that may be more of working with our local DOT office, as opposed to just running to Tallahassee and trying to getting a line item for it as well.
Mm-hmm.
The other one I would bring up to you is number 2 there, the Clearwater Beach Causeway Busway, the construction funding. I think at some level we need to keep that front and center.
Yeah.
We need to make sure the DOT and the PD&E and everything works out the way that it's going to work out, and then let's work with the MPO to make sure that it gets on a list. And I think and again, that's not necessarily saying it has to be a front and center. We have to go to Tallahassee to get money. It needs to make sure that we're supporting the local process that's set up to ensure that it ultimately gets within the DOT work plan, where it is going to get state funding to make our jobs a lot easier.
Well, and to your point, Ron, if you walking into somebody's office, you're going to talk, this is the first thank you and a reminder that the project is going on, and we'll be back to ask for the construction funding from somewhere.
Absolutely.
Can I add something, or just?
Or-
The risk of going to the legislature with something like that is that if it gets vetoed, DOT can't touch it for a
Right.
year.
That's where we follow the process.
And what I would much prefer to do is for something like that, as we get through the PD&E, we will prioritize it. We don't have that many things in our priority list that are traditional highway capacity projects like they have in Hillsborough and Pasco. We've got to do things like this. So we could put this pretty high on our priority list, I think, and then go through the normal process. And I think District 7 would be very inclined to fund it. So that to me is a safer, better route than going to the legislature and asking for construction help.
Very good. You should come to our meetings more often. Thank you, Mr.
try.
Bryant.
Many of the other items that are on there are, I think many of it you've seen before, but I think once you get beyond 2, you start getting into some operating funds and some other, capital outlay issues. You need to have a focused agenda, so I think if you start adding other things, you start potentially impacting the top of the agenda. So I would encourage you to have 1 to 3 asks of Tallahassee, maybe 1 or 2 locally to work the local process with the local MPO and local DOT office. And I think if you did 1, 2, and 3 on the draft priorities and let us get some input between now and your next meeting, as well as potentially 1 and 2, that's probably a really good place to start.
Let me also just give one more a shout out, thank you to Ron and Natalie. On the back page, number 3, PSTA is every year applying for multiple state DOT grants from the existing sources. And as you've heard, in Washington, D.C. for a long time, Harry and our legislative team knows about our applications to the feds, and then they get letters of support from our congressman, and they call FTA and help things out. And Ron and Natalie brought the idea, well, let's do the same thing in Tallahassee. Let's have, they're willing to, if we tell them about our grants that we're putting in anyway, that can only help, and it will help. And maybe we'll have fewer of these problems where suddenly the DOT says no technology and random new policies that come out of the blue.
Especially since we're so blessed, we have so much legislative leadership coming out of the greater Tampa Bay area over the next 6 to 8 years. We'd be silly not to do that.
Yeah.
So,
So we're just kind of modeling what we already do in Washington. We're gonna, that's number 3. That's going to happen. But if the legislative committee is supportive of this program, we'll come back next month to you, with this a little bit more refined, and then you can make a recommendation to the PSTA board at that point. And we're ready to go for this session committee meetings.
Brad, hold on a second. Travis has a question. Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, Travis Smart with the St. Pete Chamber. One thing is that the homestead exemption extension will include PSTA, and I want to know if there's a possibility during the 2018 legislative session, charter review, or even during the 2019 legislative session, if it's passed, if PSTA HART can be excluded at that point, be included in language similar to how the school districts work.
I think that's a really tough lift, because once you start carving us out, you start carving out a whole bunch of other special districts as well.
Yeah,
You-
JWB's
like mine.
Yeah, so the moment you do that, which is a great idea, the challenge is the impact you have across the board. And more importantly is, I'm not sure if the House would be willing to do that. I think the Senate would maybe have some appetite, but I think the overall impact of, there's a number of special districts it would impact. I know.
So, and not to diverge from the transportation discussion, but you might appreciate that I've got the staff at the county working on a list of all of those kinds of things that Tallahassee has done to local government since 2008. And the reason I ask for that is because in conversation with some of the legislators, it is unbelievable what they don't know. And part of that is because when some of this stuff was going on, it just makes me realize how old I really am. But they were getting out of high school, Ron, and/or college. So they have no historical perspective of what already has happened to local government. And they are just keeping on, trying to ding us at every single time they can. And it's very destructive, because while they've been doing that, they've also been reneging on some of their statutory responsibilities. And guess who's picking up the slack? It's local government. So at some point, there is a breaking point, and you begin to really impact quality of life that we have all come to so love and enjoy. You guys are young. You should
Well,
really
and I-
care and be
and I-
passionate about this.
And I had breakfast this morning with Commissioner Welch, and he was, obviously the impact on, it's $40 million for, Pinellas County, that you all have to make some difficult decisions, and your staffing levels are already at a level where there's no fat to cut there.
1987, we have never recovered from the recession.
So you having to look at potentially services or potentially raise taxes. And obviously, Travis, the reason they didn't do that for education is if you included education as part of that equation, the impact would
Decimate.
You would decimate the local school districts. I mean, if you did that. So, the fiscal impact on them, there's no way they could make those dollars up. I mean, the cuts in the classroom would be horrific.
Mhm.
So,
But it is possible, though, during the 2018 legislative session to push that though. It's, say,
Have you met?
oh yeah.
Well then,
I was at the Cafe Con.
well then,
Yeah, he was adamantly against, local government, but I just want to know if there's a window and opportunity for that though, at least, regardless of leadership.
technically, I think the answer would be yes, but I think for them trying to address, a constitutional amendment that's already passed to go in and change that, the likelihood of that is not good.
well, it is a sign of maturity and wisdom to admit you made a mistake. And they made a huge mistake. So with enough education, has anybody ever asked him what his angst with local government is? He used to be such a nice guy. I don't know.
Something happens when I get up there.
Well, he
So,
was there with Martha.
Commissioner, if it's okay with you, what we'll do is, if we took the first three, the first two off the back page, obviously we'll continue to work on number 3 as a part of the just overall process.
What are we doing with the back page?
1 and 2.
Moving 1 and 2 to the front page.
And what we'll do is
I'm fine with that.
we'll do some homework with some of our delegation members between now and our next meeting, and we'll be prepared to report back.
Yeah.
And hopefully put you in a position where you can approve the agenda at that point.
Excellent. All right, members, do you have anything
I like
for the
it.
good of the
I like
order?
that.
You like that? Lisa, you okay? Brad?
Very eloquent discussion, and look forward to seeing that analysis of local government impacts. And
Well, I think it'll be important for all of us.
Yeah.
To just know what, yeah.
And a highlight of that is at your next meeting on August 2nd, thanks to RSA, Senator Roussan will be coming to the back half of the meeting to, we can talk to him directly.
Okay, well, he knows I'm on the committee, right? On the board, because I'm mad at him.
Well, I
He
saw a
voted on-
presentation at something, or an update, where he was on the fence whether he was going to be supportive of the homestead thing or not.
He voted for it.
I know he did.
So, and I think the reason he's coming is, he actually called me this morning, we had a conversation about transportation. He's the vice chair of the Transportation Committee in the Senate. I think he's gonna have probably a more active role, and he's trying to get more engaged in transportation-related issues, in not only in Pinellas County, but in the overall Tampa Bay region as well. So there could be an opportunity there for us.
And we'll have a tour as well. So you're welcome to go on a tour with me and him. Yeah.
You gonna take them on the bus
That's
with
okay,
you?
we love each other.
Sure, sure.
But, I told him, he did what he did, and now he has to hone it.
Yeah.
I could say that to him, you guys can. All right, are we good?
Yes, ma'am.
We're good.
So we are adjourned then. How about that?
See you on August 8th.
See you next week.
See you July
Are you gonna be with us next week or no?
We are going, I think we're there, right?
I think one of us is, but one of us has to be elsewhere. 26.
Good job.
Yeah, good work on 17, that's for sure.
Huh?
On 2017,
Yeah.
we're making progress.
What day is it?
One baby step
I'm
at
on
a
vacation,
time.
You were gonna have to cover if I'm not on vacation.
No, last year was a good, this was a
If
good
it
year.
was easy, it was
Yeah,
all done
that's
already.
it.
Jan and I'll see you on the 26th.
We kind of just blew over it, but it was,
Oh.
that's a pretty
With the
good.
board
Really?
meeting.
Yeah.
And I see you
Take some
before that,
credit for
I
that,
see you
yeah.
at some
Yeah.
point. You've got,
I know you're on my
yeah,
calendar.
we're on the calendar somewhere else as well.
Yeah, but I think Doyle is supposed to be calling you, says the 26th.
We're on the 26th as well, after the board meeting, yeah.
Do PSA more?
But yeah, at 2 o'clock.
Right.
But I'm leaving at 10 minutes to 2 for DC that day.
Okay, we'll reschedule.
So we have to reschedule that. I'm so
Okay,
sorry.
fine.
But it's the White House calling.
I know.
What could I do?
No. And I need to chat with you offline about LIP funding, the low-income pool funding. And the way it's gonna work out is Community Health Center Savalas needs a match. We met this morning with Commissioner Wells, we're meeting with Commissioner Steele. In fact, they're meeting with her right now as we speak.
You're late.
Well, they're meeting without me.
Oh!
Is talk about potential, the county working with us on a match. I think Commissioner Steele will probably take the lead on that. I didn't make sure you were there. So I'll call you offline about it.
She's good on those
To the
things.
council?
Yeah. So
Can you
it's
turn
a-
the phone off?
Okay.
Rachel, yes,
It's actually a
the
great,
phone here, can we turn that off?
it's a great opportunity for